blade left his hand in silence, a flicker of steel against the darkness, and the first guard collapsed without a sound, his rifle clattering softly against the cobblestones. The second guard turned, confusion flashing across his face, but before he could shout, another knife buried itself in his throat, and he crumpled beside his companion. 8 guards stood between Captain William Fairbairn and the bridge he needed to cross. 8 men armed with rifles, positioned in pairs along a narrow corridor of stone and shadow. He had no gun, no backup, no time. He had only his knives, weapons his own commanders had dismissed as relics, toys, tools for a different era. They had mocked him for it, called him old-fashioned, told him that modern warfare had no place for throwing knives when bullets could do the job faster and cleaner. But bullets made noise. Knives did not. And tonight, silence was the only thing keeping him alive. William Fairbairn was born in 1885 in Rickmansworth, a quiet town northwest of London, where his father worked as a clerk and his mother raised 4 children in a cramped terrace house that smelled of coal smoke and boiled vegetables. He was a restless child, small for his age but wiry and quick, always climbing trees or getting into scraps with older boys in the lanes behind the railway station. His father wanted him to follow a respectable path, to take up a trade or work in an office, but William had no patience for desks or ledgers. At 15, he lied about his age and joined the Royal Marine Light Infantry, drawn by the promise of travel and adventure, by the idea of a life lived far from the gray streets of Rickmansworth. The Marines sent him to Shanghai in 1907, and it was there, in the teeming chaos of the international settlement, that he discovered his true calling. Shanghai in the early 20th century was a city of extremes, a sprawling port where fortunes were made and lost overnight, where opium dens and gambling houses lined streets patrolled by gangs and warlords. The international settlement, a district controlled by European powers, was supposed to be a safe zone, but in reality, it was a powder keg constantly on the edge of violence. Fairbairn joined the Shanghai Municipal Police, a force tasked with maintaining order in a place where order was an illusion. He quickly realized that the training he had received in the Marines was inadequate for the kind of combat he faced on the streets of Shanghai. Criminals did not fight by rules. They fought with knives, clubs, chains, broken bottles, anything they could get their hands on. Fairbairn was stabbed twice in his first year on the force, slashed across the ribs by a gang member during a raid on a gambling den, and cut along the forearm in a back alley brawl that left 2 men dead. He survived both attacks, but the experience changed him. He became obsessed with close-quarters combat, with understanding how to fight and kill efficiently in situations where firearms were useless or impractical. He studied jiu-jitsu under a Japanese instructor who ran a dojo near the French concession, learning throws and joint locks that could incapacitate an opponent in seconds. He studied knife fighting with a Chinese master who taught him that a blade was not just a weapon but an extension of the hand, a tool that required precision, timing, and an understanding of anatomy. Fairbairn practiced for hours every day, sparring with other officers, experimenting with techniques, dissecting the mechanics of violence. He learned that most people did not know how to use a knife effectively. They slashed wildly, wasting energy, leaving themselves exposed. The key was economy of motion, small, precise cuts to disable rather than kill, strikes to the tendons, the nerves, the soft tissue between the ribs. He learned that throwing a knife was not about strength, but about balance and rotation, about understanding distance and trajectory, about knowing exactly how many times a blade would spin before it hit the target. By the time he left Shanghai in 1940, after more than 30 years on the force, Fairbairn had been involved in over 600 violent encounters, and he carried the scars to prove it. His body was a map of old wounds, stab marks and slashes that crisscrossed his chest and arms, each one a lesson learned, a mistake he would never repeat. When the Second World War broke out, Fairbairn was 54 years old, too old for frontline combat by any conventional standard, but his reputation preceded him. British intelligence officers who had served in Shanghai knew what he was capable of, and they recruited him to train commandos and special operations units in the art of silent killing. Fairbairn developed a knife specifically for that purpose, a double-edged blade with a tapered point and a slim profile, designed to slip between ribs and penetrate vital organs without catching on bone or cartilage. It became known as the Fairbairn Sykes fighting knife, and it was issued to British commandos, the Special Air Service, and later to American and Canadian Special Forces. But Fairbairn did not just teach knife fighting. He taught a philosophy, a way of thinking about combat that went beyond technique. He taught that hesitation was death, that in close quarters, the man who acted first would win. He taught that there was no honor in a knife fight, no room for sportsmanship or mercy. You fought to survive, and you used every advantage, every trick, every dirty move that gave you an edge. His students respected him, but they also feared him. He was quiet and unassuming, a small man with graying hair and a soft voice. But when he demonstrated a technique, when he moved, there was something in his eyes, a coldness, a detachment, that reminded them that this man had killed more people than most soldiers would ever see in a war. In the spring of 1944, Fairbairn was sent to France as part of a mission to assist resistance fighters operating behind German lines. The Allied invasion was coming, and the resistance needed support, training, weapons, intelligence. Fairbairn's role was to train sabotage teams in close-quarters combat, to teach them how to move silently, how to kill sentries without raising an alarm, how to survive in situations where one mistake meant capture and execution. He worked with a small team of British and French operatives, moving through the countryside under cover darkness, meeting resistance cells in barns and cellars, passing on skills that could mean the difference between success and failure. The Germans were everywhere, their patrols constant, their reprisals brutal. Every mission carried the risk of discovery, and Fairbairn knew that if he was captured, there would be no mercy. He was not a soldier in uniform. He was a saboteur, a spy, and the Germans would torture him for information before they killed him. He carried a cyanide capsule sewn into the lining of his jacket, a final option if things went wrong. But he had no intention of using it. He had survived Shanghai. He would survive this. The mission that would define his war came in early June, just days before D-Day. The resistance had identified a German communications post located in a fortified manor house near the town of Cannes, a strategic position that controlled radio traffic for the entire sector. The post was heavily guarded, surrounded by high walls and patrolled by soldiers who changed shifts every 4 hours. The Allies needed the post destroyed before the invasion, to disrupt German communications and prevent reinforcements from being coordinated effectively. The resistance had explosives, but they could not get close enough to plant them. The guards were too vigilant, the patrols too frequent. A direct assault was out of the question. It would alert the entire German garrison and bring down a response that would crush the resistance cell before they could escape. The only option was a silent infiltration, a small team moving in undercover darkness, eliminating the guards without raising an alarm, and planning the charges before anyone knew they were there. Fairbairn volunteered to lead the team. His commanders were skeptical. He was 59 years old, an instructor, not a field operative. But Fairbairn insisted. He knew the techniques. He had taught them 100 times. It was time to prove they worked. The team consisted of 4 men. Fairbairn, 2 British commandos named Harris and Welch, and a French resistance fighter named Laurent, who knew the terrain and could guide them to the countryside without being seen. They spent 2 days planning the operation, studying maps, timing the guard rotations, identifying weak points in the defenses. The manor house sat on a low hill surrounded by open fields, making a direct approach impossible. The only way in was through a narrow ravine that led to a stone bridge, crossing a small stream at the base of the hill. The bridge was guarded by 2 sentries, and beyond it, a winding path climbed toward the manor, with additional guards posted at intervals along the way. Fairbairn calculated that they would need to eliminate at least 8 guards to reach the manor undetected, and they would need to do it without firing a single shot. Harris and Welch carried suppressed pistols, but Fairbairn vetoed their use. Suppressors were not silent. They reduced noise, but they did not eliminate it, and in the stillness of night, even a muffled shot could carry far enough to alert the Germans. The only way to guarantee silence was with knives. Harris objected. He pointed out that throwing knives were unreliable, that accuracy dropped dramatically beyond a few meters, that there was no guarantee they would hit a vital target. Fairbairn smiled, a thin, cold smile, and said nothing. He had been throwing knives for 30 years. He knew what he could do. They moved out at midnight, slipping through the countryside under a moonless sky, the darkness so complete that they had to navigate by touch and memory. Loron led the way, moving with the confidence of a man who had grown up in these fields, who knew every hedge and ditch. They reached the edge of the ravine an hour later and paused, listening. The sound of running water masked their approach, and they descended carefully, their boots finding purchase on the slick stones. The bridge was ahead, a low stone arch barely visible against the darkness. Fairbairn could see the glow of 2 cigarettes, the guards standing on either side of the bridge, their rifles slung over their shoulders, their voices carrying in low murmurs. He gestured for the others to stay back, and then he moved forward alone, his steps silent, his breathing controlled. He carried 4 knives, balanced throwing blades he had crafted himself, each one weighted perfectly, each one an extension of his will. He stopped 10 meters from the bridge, hidden in the shadow of a boulder, and drew the first knife. The weight of it was familiar, comforting. He could feel the balance, the way it sat in his hand, the way it wanted to fly. He exhaled slowly, his eyes fixed on the first guard, the man on the left, the one facing away. He threw. The blade spun twice and buried itself in the base of the guard's skull, severing the spinal cord, and the man dropped instantly, his cigarette falling from his lips, his body folding soundlessly to the ground. The second guard turned, his mouth opening to shout, and Fairbairn's second knife took him in the throat, the blade punching to the windpipe, silencing him before the sound could form. The guard staggered, clutching at his neck, blood pouring between his fingers. And then he fell, his body hitting the stones with a soft thud. Fairbairn was already moving, crossing the bridge, retrieving his knives, wiping the blades clean on the dead men's uniforms. Harris and Welch came forward, their faces pale, their eyes wide. They had seen knife kills before, but never like this, never with such precision, such cold efficiency. Fairbairn said nothing. He gestured up the path, and they continued. The third and fourth guards were posted 50 meters up the path, standing on either side of a wooden gate that barred the way to the manor grounds. They were alert, their rifles held at the ready, their eyes scanning the darkness. Fairbairn approached from the side, using the cover of a low stone wall that ran parallel to the path. He moved slowly, each step deliberate, his body low to the ground, his breathing shallow. He could hear the guards talking, their voices tense, discussing the war, the invasion everyone knew was coming, the fear that hung over every German soldier in France. Fairbairn reached a position 15 meters from the gate and drew 2 knives, one in each hand. This would be harder. 2 targets, both facing different directions, both capable of raising an alarm if he missed. He waited, watching their movements, timing their rhythm. The guard on the left shifted his weight, turning slightly to light a cigarette, and in that moment, Fairbairn threw. The first knife took the man in the side of the neck, and he collapsed without a sound. The second guard reacted instantly, his training overriding his shock, his rifle coming up, his mouth opening to shout. Fairbairn's second knife hit him square in the chest, the blade sliding between the ribs, piercing the heart, and the shout died in his throat. He staggered, his rifle falling, and then he dropped, his body sprawling across the path. Fairbairn retrieved his knives and moved on, his heart rate steady, his mind clear. The 5th and 6th guards were more difficult. They were stationed inside the manor grounds, patrolling a narrow courtyard between the outer wall and the main building. Fairbairn and his team had to scale the wall, a 3-meter barrier topped with broken glass embedded in cement, a relic of the manor's days as a private estate. Loron produced a coil of rope and a grappling hook, and they climbed in silence, hauling themselves over the wall and dropping into the courtyard below. The guard were 20 meters away, walking side by side, their boots echoing on the cobblestones. Fairbairn moved along the wall, staying in the shadows, his eyes tracking their movement. He waited until they were facing away, and then he threw both knives in rapid succession, the blade spinning through the air, glinting faintly in the starlight. Both men fell one after the other, their bodies hitting the ground with muffled thuds. Harris and Welch dragged the bodies into the shadows, and the team continued toward the main building. The 7th and 8th guards were the most dangerous. They were posted at the entrance to the manor, standing on either side a heavy wooden door, their rifles held at the ready, their eyes scanning the courtyard. There was no cover, no way to approach without being seen. Fairbairn studied the situation, his mind working through the problem. He had 2 knives left and 2 targets. If he missed, if either guard had time to shout or fire, the entire operation would collapse. Harris whispered that they should use the suppressed pistols, that the risk was too great, but Fairbairn shook his head. He had come this far. He would finish it his way. He stepped out into the courtyard, his movements slow and deliberate, his knives ready. The guards saw him immediately, their rifles swinging toward him, their voices rising in challenge. Fairbairn threw. The first knife hit the guard on the left in the eye, the blade punching through the socket and into the brain, and the man fell instantly. The second knife took the other guard in the throat, the blade severing the carotid artery, and he collapsed, blood spraying across the door. Fairbairn walked forward, retrieved his knives, and pushed the door open. The manor was silent. The guards were dead. The mission could continue. Harris and Welch planted explosives while Fairbairn and Laurent stood watch, their ears straining for any sound of alarm, any sign that they had been discovered. The charges were set on a timer, giving them 30 minutes to get clear before the manor erupted in flames and rubble. They moved quickly, retracing their steps through the courtyard, over the wall, down the path, across the bridge. By the time the explosives detonated, they were 2 kilometers away, crouched in a hedgerow, watching the orange glow light up the sky. The blast destroyed the communications post and killed everyone inside, disrupting German operations in the sector for 3 critical days. Days that would prove decisive when the Allied invasion began. The resistance cell escaped without casualties, and Fairbairn's team made it back to Allied lines without incident. The mission was a success, one of many anonymous operations that shaped the outcome of the war, carried out by men whose names would never appear in the history books. Fairbairn returned to England after the invasion, his role in France complete. He continued to train Special Forces units for the remainder of the war, passing on the skills and techniques he had developed over a lifetime of violence. He never spoke publicly about the mission at the manor, about the 8 guards he killed with nothing but throwing knives, about the moment when his commander's mockery turned to silent respect. It was not his nature to boast, and he saw no glory in what he had done. He had simply applied the lessons of Shanghai, the philosophy he had taught to thousands of soldiers. Hesitation is death, silence is survival, and a knife in the right hands is as deadly as any gun. After the war, Fairbairn retired to a small cottage in Scotland, where he lived quietly until his death in 1960 at the age of 75. His obituaries mention his service in Shanghai and his role in training commandos, but they said little about the specifics of his wartime missions. About the night he proved that an old man with throwing knives could do what younger men with modern weapons could not. The Fairbairn Sykes knife became an icon, issued to Special Forces units around the world, a symbol of silent lethality and precision. But the man behind the knife, the man who had survived hundreds of street fights in Shanghai, who had killed 8 German guards without making a sound, who had turned an outdated weapon into a tool of modern warfare, faded into obscurity. His students remembered him, passing on his teachings to new generations of soldiers, but his name never became famous, never appeared on monuments or in popular histories. He was content with that. He had never fought for recognition or glory. He had fought to survive, and he had taught others to do the same. In the end, that was enough. The story of William Fairbairn is a reminder that warfare is not just about technology or firepower, but about skill, creativity, and the will to adapt. The commanders who mocked his throwing knives saw them as relics, as weapons that had no place in a modern conflict. But Fairbairn understood something they did not. That silence is often more valuable than noise, that precision can be more deadly than volume, and that an old weapon in skilled hands can outperform a new one wielded carelessly. He proved that the principles of combat do not change, even as the tools evolve. Speed, surprise, and economy of motion remain as relevant today as they were in the back alleys of Shanghai or the courtyards of occupied France. His legacy lives on in the training of Special Forces soldiers, in the techniques taught to commandos and operatives around the world, in the knife that still bears his name. But more than that, his story is a testament to the idea that innovation does not always come from new technology, but from a deeper understanding of old truths. Fairbairn did not invent the throwing knife. He perfected it. He turned skepticism into respect, mockery into silence, and in doing so, He saved lives and changed the way wars are fought. The 8 guards who died that night never knew what killed them. They never saw the blade coming, never heard the whisper steal through air, never had time to shout or fire. They were there, and then they were not, erased from the battlefield by a man who understood that the most effective weapons are not always the loudest. Fairbairn walked away from that mission the same way he walked into it, quietly, without fanfare, without glory. He did not need recognition. He had the satisfaction of knowing that he had been right, that the weapon they mocked had proven its worth, that the old ways still had a place in the new world, and that, in the end, was all that mattered. The lesson of William Fairbairn is not just about knives or combat techniques. It is about the value of mastery, about the idea that true skill transcends fashion and technology. It is about the courage to trust your training when everyone around you doubts. It is about the willingness to step forward when others step back, to put yourself on the line for a mission that others consider impossible. Fairbairn was 59 years old when he killed those 8 guards, an age when most men are thinking about retirement, not infiltration missions behind enemy lines. But age did not slow him down, because his skill was not dependent on youth or strength. It was dependent on knowledge, on experience, on a lifetime of practice and refinement. He had spent 30 years learning how to throw a knife with perfect accuracy, how to read an opponent's movements, how to kill efficiently and without hesitation. And when the moment came, when the mission required those skills, he did not falter. He stepped forward, picked up his knives, and did what needed to be done. In a world obsessed with the newest technology, the fastest weapons, the most advanced tactics, Fairbairn's story is a reminder that sometimes the simplest tools are the most effective. A knife does not jam. It does not run out of ammunition. It does not require batteries or maintenance. In the hands of a master, it is silent, precise, and utterly lethal. Fairbairn understood that, and he built a career around that understanding. He taught thousands of soldiers to see the knife not as a backup weapon, not as a last resort, but as a primary tool for specific situations where noise was the enemy and silence was survival. He taught them that the weapon mattered less than the man wielding it, that skill and determination could overcome technological disadvantages, that the warrior who trained hardest and thought deepest would prevail over the one who relied on superior equipment alone. The legacy of that night in France, of the 8 silent kills that cleared the path to the manor, is not just in the mission's success or the communications post-destruction. It is in the proof that old wisdom still holds value, that tradition and innovation are not opposites but partners, that the lessons of the past can inform the battles of the future. Fairbairn took a weapon that many considered obsolete and showed that in the right hands, with the right training, it could accomplish what modern firearms could not. He did not do it for glory or recognition. He did it because it was the right tool for the job, and he was the right man to use it. And in doing so, he wrote a chapter in the history of special operations that is still studied and respected today, even if his name is not widely known. William Fairbairn's life was a testament to the idea that true mastery takes time, that skill is built through repetition and refinement, that the path to excellence is long and difficult and worth every step. He did not become a legend overnight. He became a legend through 30 years of street fights in Shanghai, through countless hours of practice, through a willingness to learn from every wound, every mistake, every close call. And when the war came, when his country needed him, he was ready. He stepped into the darkness with nothing but his knives and his skill, and he emerged victorious, proving once again that the most dangerous weapon is not the one that makes the most noise, but the one wielded by a man who knows exactly what he is doing. The 8 guards fell without a sound, and the mission succeeded. The manor burned. The communications network collapsed, and the Allied invasion moved forward on schedule. None of that would have happened without Fairbairn, without his willingness to step forward when others doubted, without his absolute confidence in his ability and his tools. He did not need their approval. He did not need their praise. He needed only the satisfaction of knowing that he had done his job, that he had proved his point, that the throwing knife, the weapon they mocked, had accomplished what they said was impossible. And in the end, that was enough. That was always enough. Subscribe for more stories like this, and let us know where you're watching from in the comments below.